The waves around the Flannan Isles never sleep. They crash against black cliffs, chew through stone, and send bursts of salty mist skyward like steam from an unseen engine. You would never mistake this place for peaceful. The isles are jagged, almost offended to exist, and at their center stands Eilean Mor, a slab of rock barely 2 kilometers wide, constantly battered by sea and wind. It was here, in 1899, that the Northern Lighthouse Board of Scotland erected a vital light. Ships along the west coast needed a warning. This is where the sea breaks men. Isolation wasn't a side effect of the job, it was the point. The crew assumed the keepers were delayed or there was a mechanical failure. The seas were high that week. Storms are routine here. No cause for panic. Keepers were carefully selected, trained to endure silence, repetition, and a steady pressure from the elements. Inside, the entrance hall was undisturbed. The clock had stopped. The kitchen fire was out. A meal had been prepared, but not eaten. A chair was overturned. Not many could last. The few who did became deeply private. No footprints outside. Not that the rain-slick rock would preserve them. The journal maintained daily by the principal keeper ended abruptly 3 days before. But as the landing party approached, they noted something odd. No one came out to greet them. That was unheard of. The keepers always came down to help dock and carry supplies. The Flannan Isles, after all, do not invite conversation. So a 75-foot stone tower was built, tall, whitewashed, and crowned with a revolving lens visible for miles. It was manned by 3 men at a time, always 3. One keeper always remained inside. Gear was tethered. They had survived previous storms, far worse, and besides, why would a seasoned crew leave a meal half-eaten, a chair knocked over, without finishing their journal? To speak of crying, of prayer, of hearing strange sounds, that was not normal. And most disturbing of all, Donald MacArthur, the youngest of the 3, was known for his temper and stubbornness. Locals described him as a fighter. He would not have left the tower without his oilskin, yet one of the coats remained on its peg. They took turns, on and off duty, in shifts of weeks, sometimes longer, in storms. A few claimed the bell, now removed, used to ring when the sea was still. But to those who study history, it's the pattern that's most haunting. Not the drama, but the mundane strangeness, the silence, the missing moment. In December of 1900, something happened. Something that has never been fully explained. Not by investigators, not by family, not by historians. They proposed that during the storm, one of the men had gone out to secure equipment, been swept away by a rogue wave, and the others had followed in a rescue attempt, only to suffer the same fate. It began with silence. On December 15th, the steamer Arctur passed through the area and noted that the lighthouse, expected to be shining clearly through the winter dark, was not lit. But by December 26th, when the relief vessel Hesperus finally made the crossing to deliver supplies and rotate in a new keeper, concern turned quickly to dread. The lighthouse stood intact. There was no sign of fire, damage, or distress from the outside. They made their way up the steep path to the lighthouse. The outer gate was locked, the main door closed. The most chilling discovery came when they checked the bedrooms. All 3 beds were neatly made, but the keepers, James Duquette, Thomas Marshall, and Donald MacArthur, were nowhere. Nothing was missing. No sign of violence. December 12th, gale from the north. MacArthur crying. December 13th, storm continues. Prayer said at midday. All three fearful, strange noises in the wind. December 14th. Today. Sea still restless. God is over all. There were no further entries. Investigators from the Northern Lighthouse Board arrived shortly after. Their conclusions were conservative, but even at the time, the report felt too clean because protocols were in place. In severe storms, no one was to go out alone. There were other details too. The logbook entries themselves were strange. These were hardened men, trained to withstand solitude, fear, and endless wind. To this day, the disappearances of those three men are considered among the great maritime mysteries of Europe. But maybe the real mystery is not how they died. Maybe the mystery is how quietly they disappeared. 3 lives blinked out in a place built precisely to be seen from far away. In the weeks that followed, the lighthouse was manned by others. Some refused to take the post. Others reported hearing whispers on stormy nights. It may sound romantic to think of them vanishing into a mist, taken by a great wave. No struggle, no farewell, just gone. And one has to wonder, what kind of fear would drive 3 men to abandon all protocol and step into the worst storm the Hebrides had seen in years? It's difficult to understand the true nature of isolation without standing on a place like Eilean Mor. Even on a clear day, the sky seems larger here, heavy with silence, stretched wide over an ocean that holds no concern for human presence. Centuries before the lighthouse was even imagined, sailors avoided these rocks unless forced by storm. They told stories of strange lights moving across the cliffs, of eerie hums at night, and of birds behaving like no birds should. Not among the officials or London newspapers, but among the men who had to replace them. The new keepers, in personal letters, in the margins of logbooks, they left careful hints. The name itself, Flannan, is said to come from Saint Flannan, a 7th-century Irish missionary whose connection to the island is uncertain, yet somehow spiritually resonant. The island is more rock than land, covered with tufts of coarse grass and marked by the occasional seabird cry. I've checked the foundation, nothing loose. It doesn't feel like the sea. But folklore doesn't die just because official records start. It simply waits. His remark wasn't published. It stayed buried in the archives until a later historian found it by chance. I relet it. 10 minutes later, it went out again. It's the same principle behind the unsettling hum, sometimes experienced near waterfalls or beneath bridges. You don't hear it, you feel it. All equipment in working order. I did not report this, not worth the questions. And beneath all of that, always, is the low rhythm of the waves, crashing, retreating, crashing again. The Flannan Isles, of which Eilean Mor is the largest, have long carried an uneasy reputation. By the time the Northern Lighthouse Board took control of Eilean Mor in the late 19th century, those tales had quieted, replaced by more practical concerns. Engineering, schedules, staffing. Why did only the men vanish? In the right weather, with just the right sea current, such a wave could rise up 30 meters or more and sweep the land clean. Some point to damage on the western side of the island, twisted iron railings and displaced rocks as evidence. But it's also ambiguous enough to mean nothing at all. But this is pure speculation. No blood was found, no signs of struggle, and all 3 men were known to be capable and professional. Just a lighthouse, still standing, still automated now, but still swept by winds that whisper stories to the gulls and salt. Besides, It's unlikely that a fight would result in all three disappearing, with no trace left behind. Following the mysterious disappearance of the three lighthouse keepers in December 1900, whispers began again. Perhaps, they say, one man broke, and the others followed, in confusion or panic, into the storm. But again, this assumes something dramatic happened, and there is no direct evidence for such a breakdown. 3 names, a half-eaten meal, a logbook with a final line, the rest washed clean. One wrote in 1902, "How many other times has it happened? Simply never noticed, with nothing. On calm nights, I sometimes hear a knocking from below the kitchen floor." Another, from 1905, "Last Tuesday, the lamp extinguished itself at dawn." These weren't dramatic ghost stories. They were subtle reports, written by practical men who had every incentive not to be seen as superstitious. In 1921, an inspector from the Lighthouse Board visited and noted how even the most competent men are uneasy here, as though the island resents being watched. But what could have caused such fear? Geologists studying the island in the 1950s proposed infrasound as one possible explanation. Low-frequency vibrations produced by the constant wind against the cliffs, creating an unease in the human body that can't quite be described. That theory would explain the persistent discomfort, but not the disappearances. Several other theories have been proposed over the years. One involved a single, enormous wave, a freak wave, now more commonly known as a rogue wave. But this leads to another question. If such a wave struck the island with that much force, why did the lighthouse itself remain undamaged? Another theory suggests internal conflict, a violent argument between the keepers that turned fatal. A few fringe historians point to mental collapse, brought on by prolonged exposure to stress, isolation, and the unnatural rhythm of the sea. In fact, the only real clue left behind is that strange final entry in the log, "God is over all." It's the kind of line one might write at the end of something, a decision, a surrender, a warning. More than a century later, modern researchers agree on only one thing: we will never know. There is no evidence left to uncover, no remains, no confessions, no records. And this may be what makes Eilean Mor so unforgettable. Not the possibility of death. Many have died at sea. Not the age. There are older lighthouses with stranger tales. But the idea that a place can consume people so completely, not with violence, but with quiet. And when we look back, we're not even sure what we lost. And that leads to a more unnerving question. If this happened once, with no explanation, the lighthouse at Eilean Mor still stands. It no longer needs keepers. Since the early 1970s, its powerful beam is automated. A rhythm pulsing through fog and darkness, operated remotely, its heartbeat mechanical. No one lives on the island now. No one listens to the wind scrape the shutters. No one writes in a logbook. But the stories still come. When the Northern Lighthouse Board installed automation equipment in 1971, a crew spent several days on site upgrading the old mechanisms. They arrived prepared for harsh weather, tight quarters, and isolation. What they didn't expect was the atmosphere, that subtle, indescribable unease that lingered inside the stone walls. One technician, in a private oral history decades later, remembered, "It felt like we weren't alone. You'd turn a corner and feel something had just moved past. Doors creaked when they shouldn't. The wind was too regular, like it knew your name. None of this was included in official reports, of course. Engineers don't write down ghosts, but the weight of the place never left them. Since then, Eilean Mor has been uninhabited. Ferry crews occasionally drop off maintenance teams, meteorologists, or surveyors, but no one stays long. The weather, the terrain, and the lingering sense of absence, they make prolonged work difficult. The disappearance of the 3 lighthouse keepers in 1900 remains an unresolved entry in British maritime history. Officially, it is ruled an accident. The ocean claimed them. End of record. But unofficially, the legend lives on. Locals on nearby Lewis still tell children, in a half-joking tone, never whistle toward the Flannan Isles. Fishermen, even today, will pause when passing the island and nod, not in reverence, but in acknowledgement. There are newer theories now, shared online and in fringe journals. Some involve electromagnetic interference. Some suggest magnetic anomalies from the island's basalt rock. And a few, more creatively, speculate about time slips, an accidental removal from history, as if the men simply stepped out of the world. But perhaps the most sobering possibility is also the most mundane, that sometimes the world forgets people not in grand moments of catastrophe, but in tiny, unnoticed silences. They were 3 men. They had names, families, lives. They fought storms. They kept the lamp burning. They watched the horizon, night after night. And then one night, they vanished. And what is a lighthouse, really, if not a structure meant to fight forgetting? Its job is to keep being seen, a signal against absence. And yet this lighthouse was the setting for one of the greatest disappearances in modern maritime history. Even now, if you visit the Northern Lighthouse Board's website, you'll find Eilean Mor listed. It has coordinates, a history, a function. But what it no longer has is a story that ends. The light still turns. The wind still howls. The sea still knocks. And if you lean just a bit too close to the edge of the island, you might imagine what it felt like to hear the last bell, or see your friend's coat on the peg, or feel, for just a moment, that the island itself was breathing and listening. Because the question left behind is no longer what happened to the men. The real question is, what does it mean when the only witnesses are wind, stone, and sea, and none of them will speak?